Paul Keating, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, John. Nice to be here.
So what we've got at the moment is a campaign that is increasingly presidential.
I don't think it is increasingly presidential on the Labor side. You know, at the Labor Party launch, you saw Bill Shorten, but you saw the front bench, what would be the cabinet sitting beside him. The Labor Party is not presenting a presidential thing. The Liberal Party is. The reason that Morrison had no front benches on stage for the launch is that there's none you can pull together to turn into a cabinet. The best people have already gone.
Josh Frydenberg was front and centre?
Oh, well, there's got to be one or two left, but that's about it. But this was, did you see the Labor lineup, how impressive it is? I mean, virtually what Shorten is doing is presenting himself as the chairman of a very competent board, a very competent cabinet, and it would be a competent cabinet. The last time we saw the Labor Party this good, I think, as a cabinet, was really in 1983 with Bob Hawke's first ministry. You know, this is what you're seeing again with Shorten. So Shorten will be the competent leader of a really important and solid team. The Liberal Party has not seen Morrison. I mean, what's amazing about the Liberal Party is they've actually made a virtue of having no strategy. You know, the Liberal Party's out there saying, please elect us. By the way, we don't have any strategy for the country. We don't have any vista for the country. There's no panorama. There's no view about the big shifts in world power. But by the way, our leader is the man next door. He'll jump the fence and do a barbecue for you. He'll pull on the baseball cap. You know, he's the guy next door. Well, thank you. We need more than the guy next door.
John Fain with Paul Keating, who is joining the campaign for the second time in recent weeks. You made a contribution to understanding the role of Australian security services last week that had you roundly condemned. Do you regret your comments that it's the nutters in charge of Australia's spy services?
I was sort of speaking in code, John, to the foreign policy and security establishment. Of course we need a security apparatus to deal with terrorism and insidious influences. They're in all societies.
So who are the nutters?
And the agencies will do that. But what in shorthand I was suggesting is that, important as it is, security agency intelligence should not be the currency of Australia's foreign policy settings. In other words, the foreign policy of Australia should be made in relation to the tectonic plates of power in the world. That's what we should be making the foreign policy, and not sort of university dormitory chit-chat, which the intelligence agencies pick up in their signals intelligence, and then that goes into the cabinet room informing the foreign policy. Now, all I'm saying is that our foreign policy should be made in the cabinet room in relation to these big tectonic shifts. You can see this overnight with the Chinese and the Americans arguing about trade policy.
Well, the tariffs started, the war's going back up.
What would you prefer, if you're a rational person, wouldn't you prefer cabinet ministers in the Security Committee and Foreign Policy Committee of the Cabinet to be looking at these gigantic movements, or do we simply be listening to, you know, corridor chit-chat in university dormitories about who said what and what made it into the Chinese media?
We'll come to tariffs and trade wars in a moment. Should the Labor Party, if indeed they win on Saturday, should they dismantle Peter Dutton's mega Department of Border Force, Home Security?
I think that's a matter for administrative judgment. But look, I tell you this, it's worth saying this. I think, look, I joined the Australian Parliament 50 years ago this year. You know. In those 50 years, I've never seen any public figure as mean or mean-spirited as Peter Dutton. And at this election, those electors in Dixon have a chance to drive a political stake through his dark political heart.
Isn't he just doing what I
hope they do.
It's what the government he's a member of. He's a minister, he's given a job, and he goes out and does it, as Scott Morrison did as his predecessor.
Yeah, look, the thing is, the meanness which informs his view of the world and the country means that with this big apparatus at his hand, you would not know where his priorities are. Let's go back to basics. We live in the Asia Pacific. We've got a continent of our own and a border with nobody. The great power here is China, which is going to have influences all the way through, and we have our traditional relationship with our security partner, the United States. A clever country has a foreign policy which deals with both influences.
We talk about reform. You've talked about economic reform, but what about parliamentary system reform? What about locked-in fixed terms? 4-year terms are often referred to. What about reforming the donation system? What about reforming some of the machinery of government, not just the policies?
Yeah, those things are good. But
no one talks about
what's been
them.
happening in Australia, John?
There's a great impatience.
There have been no great political ideas really in Australia for a quarter of a century. You know, Bob Hawke and I removed the sort of closeted, protected economy and opened it up to the world, and look at the increases in wealth. When there are no big ideas out there, the Twitter sphere takes over.
The Labor Party don't seem to have many more of them than the Liberal Party.
I know. Look, Shorten has taken the biggest program, a defined program, in terms of... you can just let me go down some of the
changing the tax system, but it's just a different version of changing the tax system.
Let me go through them. TAFE and universities, $10 billion. New jobs tax cut and investment guarantee, $15 billion.
But these are the things governments do, aren't they?
But hang on, Medicare cancer package. Preschool support for kids in special, cheaper childcare, $15.9 billion. These are big, and they're paid for by knocking off tax expenditures that shouldn't have been there in the first place.
No, the big reform would be to accept and acknowledge what everyone knows, which is the GST should be 15%, and that'd save everybody's income tax
Well, I don't think
problems.
everyone does know that. And the thing is, you see, what's so pernicious about increasing the GST is that for people on ordinary incomes, their income and savings are one and the same. Income and expenditure is one and the same. They spend all of their income.
Yep.
So therefore they get belted 15. But if you're a strong earner and a big earner and you save most of your income, of course you don't pay the GST. And that's why the GST is regressive. At 10%, fine, it's a change of the tax mix. But at 15, you start to have these very, very, very important effects on the low paid.
A couple of other quick things. Clive Palmer's gone to Fiji.
I wish he'd stay there. Couldn't he buy a hotel there and then bury himself underneath it?
He's spending Lord knows how much, tens of millions of dollars on full-page ads to buy a position in the Senate.
Yeah, it's obscene. Yeah.
Why? If a wealthy individual wants to spend money...
He's perfect right. But, but you would think at least there'd be some modicum of conscientiousness. You wouldn't take yourself off to Fiji, you wouldn't think, would you?
Well, he claims that he's there for deeply personal reasons. He claims he has a friend who's terminally ill and he's made a flying visit. In fact, I think his quip was, when you've got a private jet, you can do things like this.
Well, probably you can.
But when you're prosecuting a federal election campaign and claiming to be a serious contender for the balance of power?
Yeah, well, he has no policy other than preference for people who are wealthy.
We'll see what happens on Saturday. Are you confident of a Labor win just finally?
Where I was the best position on the field is one out and one back. So you dart a bit like Winks. You sort of run up to the end. I think Bill Shorten will be the Winks of this election.
Been fascinating as always. Thank you for your time and thank you for getting in touch. Former Labor Prime Minister Paul Keating, who was in Melbourne for private events over the weekend and got in touch and said, I want to make a contribution